Hi everyone, I'm Soumya, a software engineer and an educator. Welcome back. This is module 4 of the interview series. In this module, I'll explain the important interview questions of mobile application development. So let's get started in the tutorial. Number 1, describe different type of services in Android. So before discussing the types of services, let me tell you what services are. So services are very special component in Android. Why they are important? Because this is the component that helps us run background tasks, For example, if you have to perform some download upload operation, okay, you have to perform such operation which do not require interaction with the user, like user is not supposed to press or click on button, or they're not supposed to see it, like it can keep going on in the background. Then for such purposes, services are very very important. And like in our day-to-day life as well, like we use so many applications. For example, music, right? We most of us use Spotify. So if you have to use WhatsApp, if you have to switch to another application, LinkedIn, Twitter, anything, so in the background, like you have seen, music continues playing, but you are busy using some other application, right? So that is kind of the best example of services. The main aim of services is to ensure that the app remains active in the background, so that the user can perform multiple tasks like we do in our daily lives, right? And if you talk about the types of services, there are three main types of services. Number 1 is your foreground service, number 2 is your background service, and at number 3 is your bound service. Foreground, background, and bound services, these are the three types of services. Moving ahead, how would you communicate between two fragments? So this is kind of one of the most favorite interview questions of interviewers. Like we have used fragments while creating applications, right? If you haven't, you can check out my past tutorials and you'll get good idea of it. So to communicate between two fragments, there are two most commonly used ways. Number 1 is using view models, and number 2, the method 2 is using interfaces. View models and interfaces, using these two we can communicate between two fragments, okay, view models and interfaces. So it might happen that even after giving the answer that there are two ways, via interface or via view model, interviewer might ask you to show by live coding, like to show them by writing code in Android Studio or IDE, right? That how you can actually do it, like create some fragments and do this with the help of some example. For that thing, I would say just give it a try. Create a project and try to make sure that you are well aware that how to actually implement the interface as well as view model method to transfer the data, or maybe one is also enough, but you must know either of these, like how to transfer data between, how to communicate between two fragments via either of these method. Okay, if you want me to do it, let me know in the comment and I will make a separate tutorial for this as well. Okay, it's important, I mean you must know it. So moving ahead, explain the dialog boxes which are supported on Android. So in Android, there are these four like dialog boxes which are supported. Number 1 is your alert dialog, okay. Number 2 is date picker dialog, and then you have time picker dialog, and finally progress dialog. So here the names are a bit self-explanatory, but still let me tell you a few features of these. So alert dialog, it supports 0 to 3 buttons along with a list of selectable items like a radio button or check boxes, okay. Talking about date picker dialog, it's self-explanatory, I mean it is used for the selection of date by the user, okay. And time picker dialog, it is used for selection of time by the user. And progress dialog, it is used to display progress bar you would have seen some sort of progress bar in many applications, right? So yes, it is used to show progress, like maybe like quickly some example is not coming up in my mind, but we have seen many times. So sometimes we want to show progress of something in the application, in the UI, right? So that's where progress dialogues are used. And this is a rough figure of all the components which are there in the dialog boxes. So this is the icon of the dialog box, this is the title, and you have the message. This is called neutral button, and this is called negative button, and it is positive button. So if you are saying are you sure you want to exit the app, so sometimes when you press back, so the application developers kind of show this sort of pop-up, are you sure you want to exit it? So you have some buttons like yes, no. So that's where positive button, negative button, and neutral button, these comes into picture. And moving ahead, what are intents and how many type of total intents are present in Android? So this is very fundamental question, I would say. I mean, when you would have started your journey developing application, so you would have studied it, but many times it happens that when we kind of escape or forget the fundamental concepts as well. So let me help you summarize it, let me help you revise it. So what are intents? Intents are there to help you move from one screen to the other screen. So let's say if you are using a page and you have a button, you are on a one page, one screen which says maybe welcome or something like that. So on clicking, when you open up, when you reach a new page, this is screen 1 and this is screen 2. So this transition from one screen to the other screen is done by intents. And even in such cases, like if you are using an application and they have shown a button that see direction or see location, and when you click it, you are directed to some map like some app like Google Maps or something like that. Basically you click a button and you are directed to another application. So that is also example of intent. There are two types of intent, right? You know what intents are. To move from one screen to the other screen, intents are needed. Number one is your explicit intent. If you have to move within your application, then that is called as explicit intent. Okay, like this is first screen, and from first screen if you have to go to the second screen, that is your explicit intent. So basically explicit intent is about staying in the same app but moving on to different screens. Maybe if we take example of, let's say, WhatsApp, so you see a list of contacts, right, to chat, to talk to, like this is WhatsApp. So you have some like options here, and after that you have list of contact. There are card views, right, profile and chat, profile chat. So this is one screen, this is screen 1. Now when you click on a particular contact, let's say you want to chat to, you want to talk to this person, you will click on this. So you will be redirected to a new page, the person profile, the name, and then you will have the chat here, his her message, your message, like that, right? So that is the example of explicit intent. You are staying in the same app, this is a screen 2, this is also WhatsApp, this is also WhatsApp. So in the same app you are moving from one screen to the another, that is explicit intent. And if you are moving to a new application from your application, that is implicit intent. For example, let's say if you are using some app in which you have to play media, and when you ask like when you click on that button, play or play the video, play the media, and it asks you do you want to play it using this app or that app. So this is example of implicit intent. If you click on Gaana, so the video will play on the Gaana app or play music, right? So that's what the example of implicit intent. In this one, you are moving from one screen to another screen, but the apps are different. This is app 1, this is app 1. From this app you will move to another screen, and that screen will be of app 2. Okay, so explicit meaning within the app you are moving the screens, you are switching between screens, but implicit means you are switching between screens but of different apps. Okay, perfect. What are the different tools which are available in Android development? We have to explain their functions. Okay, let's quickly do it. So there are multiple tools actually which are available in Android. Number one is your Android SDK. That is your software development kit. Software development kit, and also the virtual device manager. Virtual device manager. So this tool is used to generate and handle the virtual devices and SDKs. And through the emulator in the AVD you can specify, supported SDK and all those stuff. So this is one component, this is one tool, Android SDK, the software development kit. I think most of the things that we use come from the software development kit only, right? And you have virtual device manager to handle virtual devices, etc. Let me make a new page so that I can explain easily. So number one we saw SDK, right? Number two is your emulator. So emulator most of you would have used while developing the application, Android application. So like when you create an application, you want to run it to check how it will actually look on a device, on an Android phone. That's where you check emulator, right? So basically emulator is implementation of virtual machine only. It is designed to run processes within a virtual environment that resembles your smartphone, and the main use of this is testing and debugging the apps that we developers create. Okay, number three is your ADB, that is Android Debug Bridge. Android Debug Bridge, it is a command line debugging application doled out with the SDK. It enables developer to communicate with the device and facilitate action like debugging or installation of the application. Okay, and at number 4 is AAPT, that is your Android Asset Packaging Tool. It builds the .apk distributable Android package file. So these are the 4 important components: SDK, emulator, ADB, that is your Android Debug Bridge, and AAPT, that is your Android Asset Packaging Tool. Moving ahead, what are retained fragments? So the name is telling that something is retained in the fragment, like we are storing something, retaining something, right? So yes, retained fragments, these take advantage of the fact that a fragment's view can be destroyed and recreated without having to destroy the complete fragment itself. Okay, so what it does for us, how it's useful for us. So if you set a parameter, set retain instance, if you set this parameter as true, then the fragment's state will be retained. It will not be destroyed no matter what you do. If you do orientation changes, if you do configuration changes, like if you are using the app and you are rotating it like from vertical to horizontal, you are changing the view, configuration, etc., then also the instance will be retained, like it will not lose the data. Let's say you were horizontally watching a YouTube video and you were at timestamp 15 and you moved it, you made it like vertical, then also it will remain at the same place, like it will retain it. Why? Because it is taking advantage of the fact that fragments view can be destroyed as well as recreated without having to destroy the complete fragment. Okay, so retain fragment, you can recall this with the help of this retain word only. It is trying to retain something. Even if you change the orientation and do stuff, then also it will retain the information. If you set this parameter as true, set retain instance. Okay, What is Android data binding? What is Android data binding? So it is a support library that allows you to bind UI component in your layouts to data sources, okay, to data sources in your app using a declarative format rather than programmatically. Okay, so layouts are like often defined in activities with code that calls UI framework method, right? So basically, in short, you can say Android data binding, it helps you to bind the UI with the data without using program or code, etc. Perfect. And what is job scheduler? Again, very important concept in Android. So job scheduler API, it helps schedule background tasks. It helps us schedule background tasks which are executed in the application. Let's say if you have to give some condition, if the app, if the phone in which the app is, if that's connected to power, if Wi-Fi is there, and if you have some certain conditions, then only this particular background task should be executed. If you have to schedule something like that, or maybe some of the scheduling etc are done at a fixed time, like WhatsApp, it's said that at 2 a.m. in the midnight they perform some data backup, such operations, right? So if there are some background tasks which are supposed to be performed at a specific time, then in such cases job scheduler is very helpful. It helps you schedule the background tasks. Okay, moving ahead, what is view binding and can you implement and show it? So we just saw about view binding. It's there to connect the data to the UI, but let's try to implement it, how it's done and everything. So earlier we used to kind of identify the views using find view by ID, this syntax, this parameter. Okay, we used to write kind of unnecessary code. I mean, in Java, if you used to do in 10 lines, you can do in 5 lines in Kotlin using even find view by ID. But even if it's not there, even if you don't have to do find view by ID for each and everything, let's say in your screen, if you have one image view, one text view, one button, so for each of this, like this is kind of limited view. But if there are more, you have to do 1, 2, 3 times find view by ID, right? And if the components are more, then even like 10, 20, 25 find view by IDs, that sounds kind of insane, right? I mean, there is no use of writing unnecessary code, and that's where and how this came into picture. You can directly call the view by the name, by its ID, if you implement view binding. So let's get into the screen and see how it's done. Before that, I would like to tell you a bit of theory of it. Let's try to read from the official documentation only how it is and why it is. If I type here view binding, okay, view binding Android, yes, so this is the official documentation of theirs. And if you click on this, so they will tell you that why they created it, etc. So view binding is a feature. It is a feature that makes it easier to write code that interact with views. Once view binding is enabled in a module, it generates binding class for each XML layout file present in that module. So if in your application you have to use views, okay, so we know that we have those XML files in our app, right? So corresponding to each XML file, if you incorporate view binding now, if you use view binding in your application, so corresponding to each XML file, it will create some view binding classes, and with the help of which you will be able to use the views in each and every XML file directly into your source code, into your .kt or .java file. You will not need to write find view by ID multiple times. In most cases, it replaces find view by ID. This is the most useful and the most common thing which it offers. Okay, people use it for that purpose. So we have to kind of just add this line in our build.gradle. It is telling us that just add this piece of code in our build.gradle and you will be all good to go. So let's open up Android Studio and try to implement it, because might happen that the interviewer asks you to implement few stuff, like as I told you, like for the fragment communication as well, there are two ways, interfaces and view model. So they might ask you to implement as well. So this one, let's try to do it. And I'll open our new project and I will call it binding. Okay, I'll call it binding, and everything is good. Let's click on finish, and in the background you will see some download etc happening. So meanwhile, let's do one thing. We will just copy it and we will put it in our build.gradle file. Okay, let's wait for the download, everything to happen. Tip of the day: you can inject SQL into string literal. These are good. I mean, I get to learn lot many things with this. So you can see in the background the Gradle builds, all those stuff are happening. So it's kind of obvious and understood. I mean, it is a heavy software, so it downloads all those stuff, the third-party dependencies etc that's there. Android Studio allow you to easily call a Java code from Kotlin. You can see, I mean, Java and Kotlin can both go hand in hand. Let's close the tips and let's close this one as well. The downloads, everything is done. So here what I will do, I'll go in the Gradle scripts. Okay, I'll open up the build.gradle, and here you have the build types. So maybe just below this, just below the build type, let's add the build features view binding as true. Okay, once you add this, then you just have to click on sync now, so that all the important dependencies or whatever it needs is in your project in the Android Studio. Okay, perfect. I think it's done. And as soon as you add it, so what it does is it kind of create binding files, binding classes for each of your layout. So right now, if you go in your resource layout, you have one activity main. So it would have created activity main binding for this one, for this project, sorry, for this screen UI. Okay, so let's do one thing. Let me show you how we do it. Let me add ID for it. So I'll give it text view, text only. Okay, let's give it the ID text, and after this, let's go to main activity. So here what I will do, I will create a parameter. I will create a variable, to be specific, of type that class. Which class? The class which the view binding has created for activity main.xml, and that class would be activity main binding dot java kt something. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, let's create, I'll name it binding. Okay, and it should be of type activity main binding, this one. Okay, so now it is telling me that either I should initialize this variable or I should use late init var, that is, I'll tell it late init, I'll initialize you later in the project. So right now I cannot initialize it, I want to do it later only. So I will add the late init keyword here. Okay, and once I come here, what I will do, I will, as promised above, as promised here, I will initialize it. I'll give it some value. So let's initialize it, activity main binding dot inflate, and here if you do command P, we have to give layout inflator. So we'll give it from the get layout inflator method. Okay, if you see here, it is from the get layout inflator method, right? Just press enter. So the very first thing you did is you created a variable binding of type activity main binding. What is this? So activity main binding is the class that view binding has created for this screen, Okay, so after that I will initialize binding. Binding is equal to activity main binding dot inflate. You just have to call the dot inflate method, and these are not the steps which I am creating. I mean, all these steps are already mentioned here in the doc. If you see the steps etc, yes, use view binding in the activities. So they are saying that the first thing you have to do is create this variable of type of the type same as it has created for your activity. If the activity name is, let's say, activity result profile, then the class name would be something like result profile binding, right? So it auto creates it. I mean, you don't have to do anything. Once you add it in the build.gradle, no, once you add it, once you enable it in the build.gradle, it will do everything for you. As soon as you will create a new XML, it will create a automatic new binding file for it, new binding class for it. So very first thing, you have to create this variable, you have to initialize it. They have said you have to call the inflate method, okay? And after that, what you have to do, you have to get the root, I mean, you have to get the view this way, binding.root, and you have to set the content view with it. So don't worry, let me explain you here. So binding step number one, we'll create the binding variable. Step 2, we will initialize it, and the last step is, instead of setting the content view with r.layout, what we will do, binding, this is the variable dot get root. That's it. That's all you have to do, and you are all set. Step number 1, create the variable of type binding class, and then initialize it by calling the inflate method. And step 3, set the content view by calling the root method on binding.root. That's it. After that, you don't have to do that old method like text view is equal to find view by id. This is of type text view, and then you have to write the r.id the old thing. You don't have to do so much. I mean, if there are, let's say, hundreds of views in your one screen, it's kind of so hard to do this, right? So now you can simply do it. Binding dot, the id for this one is text, right? So just write binding dot text dot set on click listener. If you want to perform some action when this is clicked, then set on click listener and write the code, write the code whatever you want on pressing this text view, on pressing of this text view, on this text view. So it's pretty much simple and straightforward, I would say. I mean, you just have to follow these 3 steps that I told you. Step 0 is obviously to add this in your project, to add the view binding, step 0. And then step 1 is to create a variable of type binding class and then initialize it using the inflate method, and then you have to set the content view by calling the root method on binding, and that's it. You are done. So if someone asks you to implement the binding thingy, you can do it and just tell them that the benefit of this is we are replacing the find view by id, the old method of getting views and dealing with views. Okay, so that's the use of view binding, as it's said in the documentation as well, that in most cases it replaces find view by id. So that's pretty much it. If you want me to implement some more concepts, some tough concepts, etc., just keep telling us in the comment and we'll take the feedback, we'll accept the feedback and we'll work upon it. I hope this detailed module was helpful for you. If yes, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to Scalar's YouTube channel for more such insightful content.